Well, hello and welcome. It is time for another Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live. Really excited to have you here today with us. Hope you're able to join us wherever you might be. For those of you that may be joining us for the first time, my name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. The Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was actually started about almost 4 years ago. We're heading to the 4-year anniversary here very soon. And the organization was started around issues like restraint and seclusion, including things like suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. Very broadly speaking, all the things that are often being done to kids in the name of behavior, often things that are having consequences like trauma, injury, even death in the case of physical restraint. And of course, we see kids that are sometimes being pushed down that school to prison pipeline. So our organization was really started to try to promote positive change, trying to move away from a lot of the approaches that were really leading to poor outcomes for not just kids, but also for teachers and staff. So, broadly speaking, we're supportive of kind of trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned approaches, working with kids collaboratively. And of course, relationships are always critical when it comes to success. So I'm very excited to be here today with you, as always. And of course, we have a lot of fantastic speakers that join us. And today is no exception. Today, I'm really excited to have with us Jodi Place. And Jodi has a history as a educator and administrator, and is going to be sharing a very special presentation with us. I do want to let you know a couple housekeeping items here real quick. As always, all of our presentations are recorded, so they're available after the fact on YouTube, on Facebook, and as an audio podcast, and on LinkedIn, so you can get them in lots of places. So with all that, let me go ahead and bring Jodi up and introduce Jodi and tell you a little bit about, hey, Jodi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Great. Well, it's exciting to have you here today. I'm going to read your bio here, and then we'll get started in just a moment. You, of course, have served as a public educator for over 25 years. So you obviously started when you were about 3, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's right. And of course, prior to becoming a school administrator, you were a nationally board certified English teacher. As a school administrator, you have experience leading traditional high school and middle school settings, as well as an alternative education setting. You hold a certificate in applied educational neuroscience, and I think that's how we connected at one point, from Butler University. And you're currently pursuing and I have this in my bio, is currently pursuing your Neurosequential Model in education training led by Dr. Bruce Perry. And if there's any updates on that, you'll have to tell me in a moment. And of course, you published a quick reference guide with ASCD and supporting emotional regulation in the classroom. And aside from having the opportunity to meet you while you were in the applied educational neuroscience program, we later were able to meet at a conference. Let's see, that was the first Attachment Trauma Network conference last year.
In Houston.
Yep. And of course, we interviewed your partner in crime recently, Dustin, and I know you and Dustin actually had presented together at that particular event. And I remember going in, you had music playing. It was a great atmosphere. But the work that you're doing is amazing, and changing things. And of course, the Applied Educational Neuroscience program, that's Dr. Lori Desautel's program. And of course, we have Lori as a frequent guest here. We were just talking with her recently about her brand new book and all the great work that she's doing. Of course, that program at Butler is amazing. I think you were absolutely. And I think you were in the cohort of the first cohort that I had the opportunity to meet. And there were so many amazing people in that program. And, I always say it's like, it's the most amazing people that are in it. And, one is as amazing as the next, and people that really are shifting mindsets and practices. So it was great to have an opportunity to meet you there. So what about the neurosequential model? Is that something you're still working through?
Yeah. So I'm so excited about this next learning opportunity. I'm always looking to continue to grow and learn. And so actually tonight, and my partner in crime, Dustin, we're in another cohort together. So, oh goodness. But we are working through the second part of our experience for that. And I just hope it's just going to help us grow and build on what we're doing, so we can be even hopefully more of change agents that I know we both desire to be. So
Sure, that's fantastic.
yeah, so
And,
excited
and
about that.
yeah, and Bruce, Bruce Perry, of course, renowned, trauma expert, author. I'm always recommending "What Happened to You," the book that he co-authored with Oprah, and so many of the great books, and Lori had one as well, "Connections Over Compliance."
Mhm.
The titles alone are like enough to bring me in, like
Yes.
I've got to read this, and there's so much to the title of that book, "What Happened to You," because it's reframing so much of the way people look at the world. When you look at people, rather than saying, "What's wrong with you? Why do you do
Yeah.
this?" When you
Right.
begin to look at things differently and ask questions like, "What happened to you? What did you experience?" It can make such a major shift. So looking forward to that. And of course, you've got a presentation today that you're going to be sharing with us that I think is very much in that same vein of kind of our thought process, how we think about discipline, how we think about working with and supporting kids. So we'll get that in 1 second here. I do want to invite those of you that are watching. I usually like to ask this early. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and tell us in the chat where you're joining us from. Jodi and I were talking ahead of time. I said, well, we usually get about this many people. She's like, oh no, stop, that's going to make me nervous. So there's only a few of us. So if everybody that's there can tell me where they are and who they are and where they're from, it'd be great. I will share with you that we already have a familiar friend, Ginger Healy, joining us from Utah. Let's see. And we have somebody joining us from Maryland here as well, Angie. So I'm sure we'll have other people joining us from other places. We often have people joining from Australia or New Zealand, and it's really great to see people from all over the world that are here and interested in all of this. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring up your presentation deck, and I've got it on the screen, which is Discipline for Learning, Not Shaming. And I'll let people that are watching us live, the 3 or 4 of them, no, you don't want to overwhelm here. But I'll let folks know that if they have questions, we'll be taking questions at the end, but you're always welcome to put them in the chat. So, sometimes I know this happens with me. If I don't put it on something while I'm thinking about it, I might lose it. So feel free to put your questions in the chat at any time, and we'll try to get through to some of those questions as we wrap up the presentation. So thank you for those that are joining us. And Jodi, thank you so much for joining us to give this presentation today. I'm going to, as I promised, vanish here in a second so that you can take over and give your presentation. But if you need anything, just say the word and I'll be here. Or if things really go wrong, we've got my assistant here, Courtney, who helps out with now all of these, and she's in the backstage area as well. So if things really go off the wire, Courtney may pop up. And
The great and powerful eyes behind the curtain. I know
that's
you're ready.
right. That's right. So with that, I'm going to let you take it away.
So first, let me just say I'm so truly honored to be here. And thank you for those of you who are spending time with me today. I think one of the amazing parts of this journey is that I have gotten to meet so many wonderful people who have helped me learn and grow and evolve as a human. So truly thank you for being here and sharing in this opportunity. When I was thinking about this, and this has been a topic that I've talked about before today. I mean, as an administrator, of course, as if any of you are administrators know, discipline is just a huge part of what we have as a responsibility. And I just wanted to note one thing on this slide. When I was thinking about what to put on this slide, under my name, I could put my role and I could, put different credentials, but I want you to know that I come to you today like as a fellow traveler. And you may very well hear an announcement. I told Guy that I'm in my building right now. I just finished the day. Students just went home. So we may hear announcements. We are coming to you right now in a space of true genuineness for this work. And I'm hoping in this conversation, because I do want it to be kind of a conversation. I love interaction in the chat. So please, I will be so excited to read all of your comments and everything that you share. But I want us to come together, because I think the only way we're going to move forward with, and I'm probably going to say some things that are going to be unpopular, but a broken system. I think our discipline system is broken. And it's been broken. And I think the only way we're going to move forward to see systemic change that is long past due is for us to have uncomfortable conversations, to be willing to come to the table, to share our lived experiences, our voices, and to really reflect. So I'm hoping that in this time together, that ultimately we're going to be able to really think about where we are. And I do at the end try to give some ideas. I never want to leave the table without putting something on the table as suggestions or things that I'm considering or things that I've done that I have found to be effective. So ultimately, I just want to start making the discipline process about learning and reduce the use of it as a means to punish or cause students to frankly suffer. So just to kind of give you like just some groundwork. So I just put a fellow traveler because some of this I am coming from, I was in a division for over 20 years. And so this year I have moved not only to a new division, so that's been a huge change, but I came out of spending most of my experience in high school to middle school. I was in alternative education, and let me just give a shout out to alternative education. Alternative is not a bad word. There are so many unfair myths and stigmas associated with alternative education. But my alternative education students said that middle school was where for them things went a little bit off the rails. And so I decided this year to leave a pretty comfortable nest, a community I've been in for a long time, and come into middle school. So I say that again, that I'm having to really myself go back to what is my why, being in a system that, I have to learn myself. And so I am a fellow traveler here. As you know, I'm an English teacher at heart, so I love some quotes, and these two for me. The first one, if you've ever probably had a conversation with me, you know that I keep this Brene Brown quote on a Post-it on my desk. And so because it's so real for me, just for me as a human myself, and then as I interact with others, students, other adults in my profession, even when I interact with my children, my spouse, all of these people, that what we don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being human. And I think that it's so often that we're responding in a way that is so human, but yet how it's received, we get a reaction, or we can't see that in someone else. We look at their behavior and how we react to it. We don't see the humanity in what's happening, because I believe foundationally that behavior is communication, and that we just have to really work hard sometimes, maybe all the time, to listen to what that behavior is telling us. And so that is truly the foundation of who I am, honestly, just as a person. When I talk about going through the Applied Educational Neuroscience program, it changed me as an educator for sure, but it changed me just as a human as well, and how I interact with other people. And then the other, I've tried to put some people that I really hope that you will kind of look further into, and this will build curiosity to look deeper. But Christina Torres has done a lot of great writing, and she just keeps it so real. And so that's another quote, that our students and our children, they didn't wake up with shame. People and systems created a world that puts shame on them. We must actively work not to fix students, but to uproot and undo the systems that try and shame us and move toward a world rooted in love and care. And I think, again, when I talk about our discipline system, in general, I do think that it is something that really needs to be uprooted. It is something that I think is built on thinking we can fix kids, and I don't see kids as broken. I think most of the time they're behaving in the way that their brain and body is supposed to keep them safe. And so that was a very powerful quote for me. If you're willing to share it again, or you can kind of look at this, not even from your own point of view, but if you want to look at it from, a relationship, somebody that, kind of like outside of yourself. I was interested in what to you does shame, what does it look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like in your body? And it might even be say what it looks like, like for me, when I think about shame, it's like, I feel like it's a weighted cloak. Like I just feel like it's just something that is like draped on my shoulders and it's just so heavy. So like, what does it look like? So in just terms of thinking, like what does in your mind, shame really look like? What does it sound like? And what does it feel like to you when you experience it? And again, I don't know how many are online. So in terms of, but again, I think it's that sharing of like to name it, to tame it, and what's mentionable is manageable, right? These little reminders, but building that emotional vocabulary so that we can talk about this very, very honestly and openly, because I think when we start doing that, we can then take that and apply it to how we, on smaller scales, maybe within our classrooms, or administratively in a building, and then broaden it out to systematically how we discipline, to really say, is that what I'm seeing in the student across from me? Does it look like they're wearing a heavy cloak? Do their shoulders and body language go down? Their head goes down? What do we see? What are they saying? So I put a lot of reflective questions in here because I think through reflection, there's truly the answers and the solutions we need. Yeah, Nicole, me too. I always feel it in my stomach. And think about how many times we hear students talk about their stomachs hurting. I hear it so often with students. They'll want to go home, or they'll say my stomach hurts. And sometimes the adult response is, no, it doesn't. You're just trying to, get out of this, or you want to go home. But it's so very real to them. And they truly are experiencing probably that knot in their stomach for some reason, right? But we're kind of dismissing that they're telling us how their body feels, and that there's something going on. There's an overwhelm or there's a stressor, and they're feeling it in their body. So I just wanted us to really, and again, these are things we can kind of go back to, like, individually, because I know that's one of those questions. But I just always think I can control myself. It starts with me. So thinking about it from my own point of view. So got to jump right into a little bit of brain science. And I know we're not going to have necessarily all the time I wish we could have to delve deeply into this. But what I have here is the polyvagal, if like Dr. Stephen Porges. And this was actually a visual that was created by someone who's been on this live stream before, Connie Persecki. She is amazing. I put a link to her amazing organization on this slide. She has lots of great resources. But essentially what I wanted to make the point for on this slide is that shame and learning do not exist in the same part of our brain. When we experience shame, that is putting us in those lower regions of our brain. And if you look at the visual, that's putting us into places of fight, flight, and freeze. And if hopefully you can see some of the associations that we have when we're in fight, or freeze. So if we use discipline and the product of that is shaming, essentially our students are not learning. And it really is just scientifically that simple, because if you see learning is in that prefrontal area. So you cannot have both. We know that shame is connected with the limbic system. We know that it's linked to an urge for self-protection. So depending on how we approach discipline, we could actually create a system where we put students in flight, fight, or freeze. We put them in survival mode. And I don't think that adults in our field come to the building every day, come into a space wanting to cause and inflict fear on our children. But we have to be really honest if what we're doing is actually resulting in that, where students feel that we are not safe. We are emotionally safe. We are not, we are a danger. And so, again, I just wanted to provide some resources. We're not meant to always stay, in the social engagement place. And that's why it shows blended. We will move in our day. I'm not a morning person, so maybe I'm not all the way up at the top, but then I might move there, and then I get a phone call that is not pleasant, so then I kind of move down. But then as long as I'm able to recover, but what we don't want to have, and with some of our students that are dealing with chronic stressors, they're constantly engaged in a discipline process that is embedded with shame, then we're forcing them into that lower region. And that is very, very unhealthy. And so again, I wish I had more time to talk about that, because that's where Lori Desitel, who I will reference in this, read everything she's written. If you have an opportunity to do the Applied Educational Neuroscience program, it is transformative, and I cannot speak more highly about it. So what I wanted to do at this point is I want us to consider some of the disciplinary structures and systems that we have. So that might be in your world, whether that's, detention, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, alternative education. So sometimes we think about discipline, we think about those, but I also want to factor in incentive plans. So, and programs, and even classroom management models like behavior charts that are posted. Some different things like in PBIS, where we have, token economies, for instance. And what do those look like in your world? Or if you experience them yourself, what did they look like? So if you ever got in-school suspension, as I kind of traveled and visited and talked to a lot of colleagues, in-school suspension rooms, I find that those are spaces that have, you see these they're isolating. They want to put you in a space where you can't see others. Sometimes they're very stark. They have, you will not posters up there. You're not allowed to talk. So I guess, what do they look like, or what have you experienced in those systems? Because I think that if we're honest, by and large, what we'll see is, and I know that when my daughter was in middle school, and my daughter talks a lot. I don't know where she got it from, but anyway, she talks a lot. And so she got silent lunch as a consequence. And what that looked like for her is that they had a table in the lunchroom that she had to sit at silently. And I saw what that experience was, because really it was just public shaming, right? Go sit those students at a table where everybody can see them, everybody knows that they did something, isolate them, and don't let them have voice. I mean, that's the truth of it. That's just observably true. Sometimes, so it's this whole, we think social embarrassment will be a way. And so that kind of goes to this timeline. Again, I'm just kind of putting a few things, but you could add so much to this. But when we think about, when we say we're going to remove you from a community. So I was in alt ed, and I always try to explain that even though I think that my alternative education program ended up being a sanctuary, it was built on being trauma informed and responsive. We relationship forward and prioritized. My biggest problem is students didn't want to leave because it became such a sanctuary for them. But at the end of the day, the price of them being rejected and exiled from a community was very, part of it is they didn't want to go back to that community because they no longer felt they were welcome to that community. And so that kind of originates, in my opinion, from, going all the way back to Skinner, B.F. Skinner, which all of us in education learned about probably in our foundational courses, of if you apply an undesirable punishment, it will decrease or weaken a specific behavior. So if my daughter dislikes sitting and being humiliated and sitting silently, she won't engage in the behavior that got her there anymore, because it will be uncomfortable enough. And then as we move forward, you can see out of school suspension, really, we've had that around for a really long time. And I kind of just, we've had that around since the 1960s. And here we are, still really using it excessively, in my opinion. And then I also included some data about some different suspension rates. We've seen like an increase in the use of suspension. There was a time in the 1980s, that our president said that we just need some good old fashioned, and we again used the word discipline, and said we're going to have these zero tolerance policies, and that was so influential in our school discipline. And then we looked at data and we found that it didn't work. It was not improving or making schools any safer. It wasn't improving, actually, quite to the contrary. And so now what we see is, schools will have zero tolerance policies for, weapons, like really serious. They'll like, that's the only thing we have. But then this is a semantics game, I believe, because we actually do have embedded zero tolerance. We're seeing more and more zero tolerance for behaviors like dress code, or saying something disrespectful, that it's an automatic suspension. So you might not call it zero tolerance, but in actuality, the consequence is zero tolerance. And then, and Guy could give you all kinds of data about seclusion and restraint, but even in 19 states, it will never it makes my mind just go red to think that in 19 states they can still use corporal punishment. So I think about like, where are we today, right? Like, where is that suspension rate? And I don't know about in your school. I really don't know about in your school, but I suspect when we can crunch some numbers for the last 2 years, we're going to see suspension rates have really, really increased. And so I'll come back in a year and if I was wrong, but from what I can tell, and from my experience and from talking to so many colleagues across the country, the behavioral challenges that we're seeing, and this is where Lori Desautels wrote, she has a brand new book out, Intentional Neuroplasticity, and I am reading it, and I cannot tell you, you've got to get a copy of it, because she's talking about, where we are today, and sort of like living in this post-COVID life. Like, we're not the same. And I think that we're gonna see that data soon, because I think that all of us are experiencing. Again, if you are not experiencing, we all want to hear from you, because in my experience, the behavior challenges last year and this year have exponentially grown from what they were before. So I also want to say that sometimes, again, semantically, we think of things like positive behavior intervention systems, but just know, even though it has the word positive and behavior, there's also a lot of data about using systems like token economies. I know, like, I was talking to a colleague who was if you had gotten a certain number of, of the specific money, you could access going to the gym. And I know it's like, we're going to reward the kids who are doing the right thing. But I also think having community, having purposeful movement, being able to interact, like that shouldn't be something that you're denied, because that is only going to help. So that's, again, maybe I'm on a soapbox, but I just know, like, in our suspension rates, there's still huge disproportionality. It's not an equitable system. If you are a Black girl, you are going to be suspended at a much higher rate than any other group. If you have an IEP, you're going to be suspended at a much higher rate. And it goes on and on for groups that are disproportionately suspended. So, these are things, and it feeds the school to prison pipeline. And that, again, data validated. It's not my opinion. It's just truth. And that's just where we are. So as I move to Alpha, the history lesson, I just wanted to say that, again, my English teacher self, the root of the word discipline is about learning. And the root of the word punishment is about suffering. So if you go look up, where did the root of that word come from, it means to suffer. Discipline is about learning. And what you'll see here is, and if you remember the slide that we had before about learning being in that prefrontal cortex, first off, you're going to see, write down Revelations in Education. Again, Lori Desautel's site is absolutely so full of resources. She gives so much away. She doesn't keep anything a secret. She is just the most sharing person. And so you can go there and find things that you can use today, right now. And as Guy was saying, I'm starting this process and I'm working through with Dr. Bruce Perry. But you can see here from the Neurosequential Network, the cycle of learning. And I want you to look at the words in the cycle of learning and think about school discipline. And if any of those words would be words you'd put on the list for how you would describe school discipline. Because I dare say I'm not sure that a lot of our school discipline systems currently, those are the words that anybody would use to describe them. But again, those are required so it can be a learning process. If we want it to be a learning process, it has to be considered almost like a content area, right? Like, that's how I look at discipline. As an administrator, when I left teaching English, I now think of myself as a teacher in the realm of discipline. I get to use it as an opportunity to come beside students and help them get into this cycle of learning. And as you see, Jim Sporlater, who is featured in Paper Tigers, if you haven't ever seen that documentary, but he talks about this being whether this is a me with you or a me against you approach. And so I always look at it, it's going to be a me with you, and I get to facilitate your learning as part of this process. And then you can see all the different things that come with our prefrontal cortex. And of course, that is what we send children to school for, right? To be able to be in that learning ready brain state, and to be in that cycle of learning. And I think that traditional disciplinary systems compromise all of that. So this is, we think about how we address any content area. Like saying, I was an English teacher, we invest in helping to provide learning for our staff. We look at data to see how our students are doing in that area. We invest funding towards it because we want students to be able to have innovative approaches and engagement in content areas. So we don't do that when it comes to discipline, because I don't think we look at it as a content. We don't look at it from a learning opportunity within our building. So again, I'm just going to keep saying and evoking Lori Desautel's name. I mean, she is truly a queen. I don't know what to say other than that. But the applied educational neuroscience is based on 4 pillars. And this is a framework. It's not a checklist. It is a framework. It is how we approach once you embody the framework. And so as I move forward in my day, these are the 4 pillars. And truly, again, behavior is communication. It encourages and honors listening to our bodies, which are always trying to keep us safe and protected. And so I wanted to give you, I love this visual because we think about these roots and building these really strong roots for children. And there are some great videos on Lori's site where you see children engaging in this learning. And I think about those children going forward into middle school, high school, adulthood, and the roots that they are going to have that are going to keep them so strong and so resilient. So I wanted to, though, focus really on the educator nervous system because, and whether you want to say put your own mask on first, I said drop your own pin first. I think it really does start with us as adults. I mean, we are the ones who are building these systems of discipline. We are the ones that have, for the most part, fully developed brains. I know some of us are really young, and it could be up until like the 30s, right? But in this, another great book is called Beyond Behaviors, Dr. Mona Delahook, and she says many of the paradigms for helping children with persistent behavior challenges target the child's behavior, but leave us adults out of the equation. And again, that's back to that. We need to fix broken children. And I don't think they're broken, and I don't think they need to be fixed. And so I know that what do I every day have control of the most? Myself. And so I would say this kind of is where to start. Where do I start? And it starts with looking deeply within ourselves. And this is, again, I'm hoping to give you some different resources here, because I know like sometimes like you come to the table and you need to have the resources so that you can start the process, you can start the reflection. And so with this, what you're going to notice is if you start at the beginning, and this is that finding the why. And I know so many of us, Matthew Portell talks about, how we should all have our own personal mission statement, which I think is when I sat down to do that for myself. Again, it was a really wonderful opportunity because I have to kind of revisit that often when I am having my own dysregulation, or I'm having a really challenging day, week, month. Like, why am I doing this? What do I believe? And if you notice, like the first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items are all focused on, in this process of finding the why and guiding your interventions, all relate to the adult. All of the first 6 steps are about the adult. And so we really have to be starting with ourselves. So this is the book that Guy was talking about. It's Lori Desautel's most recent book. I haven't finished it. We're going to have a book study. Guy mentioned Ginger Healy, who's on this call. And so I'm so excited about this book. I'm excited about all of her books, but this is the one I'm reading right now. And again, when I tell you, if you go to Revelations in Education, where Lori puts so many resources, one of the great things that she has on that site are reflective questions that you individually can work through, and then you can work through collaboratively with teams to sort of help you start, I guess, seeing very sincerely what your discipline system is and is not. So it kind of starts with, and I thought these questions were really powerful. And again, this is a process, as I said, I'm a fellow traveler. So this is a process I am putting myself through because I just want to recheck myself, because I have been engaged in so much change within the last year. And so I need to recheck myself. So you have to consider your own values, your own perspective, your own, biases. So in looking at how were you disciplined as a child and what were you disciplined the most for? What do you remember when you think about discipline, and going back to, again, thinking about your sensations, your feelings, what did you experience? What words come to mind? How did you repair with adults? Or even did you? I mean, sometimes I know I've talked to one of my colleagues says, she was always, if she cried, it was always like, we sometimes, or if a child in school is crying, we're like, stop crying, stop crying. And it's like, why do we do that? And sometimes it goes back to our discipline that our own parents, crying was like not really accepted, or even from a cultural perspective, crying was not acceptable. So we're actually telling children to ignore how your body wants to handle the overwhelm and the stress and the dysregulation. And we think like we're being kind and nurturing, like, oh, don't cry, it's okay. But sometimes, I'm kind of become like a cry ambassador. I'm like, cry it out. There is stress, hormones in those tears. Like, let's just get it out. Like get it out. So cry on. And if they cry hard enough, I might cry with them, and it's good for all of us. We're going to be okay. But we can't deny that our own experiences are, again, going to absolutely influence what we are doing now and how we respond. So again, some of us of past generations, it was absolutely unacceptable to go into a building and be wearing a hat, much less like wearing a hoodie, right? And so sometimes, like, if you're in that generation and you see a teenager come into a building and they have their hoodie, it feels like it's so disrespectful. Now, I've kind of I'm like, how is wearing a hoodie connected to respect or lack thereof? And so sometimes I think it's just a generational, that's just how we were raised. That's just what was said. And maybe there is some history behind it. I've never been able to find it. But, because I look at that sometimes like that child might be a self-soothing behavior. When they put the hood up, that's them trying to isolate. That's them trying to create a safe space. That's them giving me a sign that something might be going on with them. But again, depending on how we ourselves were raised, it might be, and this, I think Ginger just posted, hoodies are often a flight response. I mean, they can't actually leave the classroom, but they can't escape by, pulling up their hood. So, again, it's just in terms of some of those perceptions and thoughts are all rooted in, and so much of our discipline system is rooted in who created that discipline system, who was that system created for, and that's why it's not working. And that's why there's disproportionality. It was never created for and to work for everyone. It was not created to be inclusive. Again, hoodies, obviously you can tell, like, that's a topic for me. Like I love a hoodie. So I have a ninth grader, like, she is forever like hoodie up. And she is in no way intending it to be disrespectful to anyone. It's not about anyone outside of herself. It's about what's going on internally for her. It's not about me. It's about her. So again, just cannot speak highly enough that this book, I can just tell you already, I've been highlighting, underlining, it's amazing. And those questions, I think. And then this is another set of questions to take it again to that next step. And I put a mirror here because, again, I think it's just about look in the mirror. It's okay. It's okay to be and feel uncomfortable with this, because I think there's going to be growth in that discomfort. I think there's going to be change in that discomfort. And so, and they're hard questions. They are some hard questions. And some of the questions, like, look at me, I'm even touching my neck right now, or I'm like, whoo, some of the questions are intense and they're hard. But they're so powerful, and I do believe they will elicit change. I think, if you come to a table where you're going to openly discuss these, like, you do have to establish and build some trust, because there's a lot of vulnerability that you have to be willing to have. But again, I think that is going to be where the change and doing something different, disrupting the system is gonna live. So I wanted to share them with you. Again, you can find all of these questions, and you can say it with me, Lori Desautels. So, and then this is again, I'm trying to go from the individual, kind of like pulling the frame out a little bit from being kind of like very, very much about myself, my past, pulling out the lens to myself and where we are sort of at a smaller level. And then now questions to ask really about the policies and practices within, and most of us have codes of conducts that have been created, every once in a while they might have something added or tweaked, but they have by and large been around for a really long time. Sometimes they'll, as different states have said, we want to move towards not using exclusionary discipline more. Sometimes they'll have some things added, but again, they get thrown in there. And like, if you put restorative practices in there, the thing about that is most teachers, even most administrators, have not had a lot of learning focused on restorative practices and how to implement those and what those look like and what those can accomplish. And again, if we looked at it like a content area, we would provide all of these supports for someone that we wanted to teach a certain, content. We would want to make sure they were kind of like an expert in that content before we said, go in there and put it in place. And then here is my little, as we said today, this is my little pocket Portell. That's what Dustin and Ginger called him today. Matthew Portell, again, another person that I would say has been an amazing resource for me, and I think would be for anybody who has met him. He is very open and is very generous to give information and provide support. Asking the hard questions, finding the truth in the data, because that's where I know I'm at right now. I need to really look hard at the data, because it's when I was in alternative education, when I started number crunching, there was disproportionality. It was there in the numbers. Again, it wasn't about, an opinion. That was the truth of it. There was disproportionality. I could look to see, this is a zero tolerance. It's not a matter of a weapon or drugs, but when we talk about chronic students being excluded because of chronic behavior, what is that chronic behavior? It's probably going to be defiance, disrespect, or disruption. Those 3 Ds are referrals that are constantly generated in my world. And so we'll put it under chronic discipline, and then we'll say, if you have a certain number of referrals for this, behavior, then you're going to be suspended. Even if we look at the individual behaviors, and again, they are not causing anyone to be unsafe. They are not, they're minor offenses in and of themselves. So, and then the reason I put Matthew Portell over there, my pocket Matthew Portell, is he is the hashtag disruptors unite. We got to disrupt the status quo, because it's just not working. And we're not seeing learning. We're not seeing learning. And the way I know that is the data isn't supporting we're seeing learning. We're not seeing students coming back from what we call discipline, actually not engaging in that same behavior. If you think about your students that probably experience the disciplinary practices and policies the most, they're telling us as they keep repeating that same behavior that whatever we've put in place is not about learning, because they continue to engage in it, because it's really about communication. And they're like, you're not hearing me. You're not hearing me. So, and this is probably the biggest question I get, because I think, again, when we start talking about so much discipline is about adult comfort, adult control, and it feels really, really scary to think sort of outside the box. And so this is not, it's like, what is the root of this question? When you say the word accountability, what does that mean? What actually do you mean when you say, what about accountability? Because it's like, oh, we're just going to let them get away with it. If I let them get away with it, then others are going to see that and then they're going to engage in it. I had one time a teacher said, if I let a student sleep, then a student's going to think that's okay. And I was like, do you think that if you let one student sleep, and again, by the way, I usually just ask the question and I usually am stunned by the response for students sometimes, because some of them are like, I was up until 4 a.m. because, and then they'll tell me something really horrible. And I'm always like, I can't even believe you're at school right now. Like, that's, their stories continue to show me what amazing children they are, that they're still present in our class. But yeah, they were up till 3 a.m. because, their, single mom was sick and they had to go to the hospital or whatever the story is. But I've never seen like that happen. I just never have, like, okay, so that you let that student sleep and then the next day 30 students put their head down their desk and they're like, we're all sleeping. I just haven't seen that happen. But what does accountability mean to you? I mean, what is the outcome you're seeking? So if the outcome you're seeking, if you're getting that, then it's working. But reason I put Einstein, I'm like, if we continue to do the same thing over and over, not getting the outcomes we want, then like, right, isn't that like just insanity? So I think, like, what are the outcomes you're seeking? And are your current practices moving you closer to that? Or are you stagnating, or are they moving you further from what you ultimately want to see as a result? And that's where I think you have to do the data mining. You have to come on a regular and frequent basis together. We used to come together as a disciplinary evaluation team to really look at our tier 2 and tier 3 students and to talk about what interventions we were putting in place. What were we seeing in terms of their attendance and their grades, and whether they were getting more or less discipline response. And I mean, again, it told us it's either working or it wasn't. And if it wasn't working, then why would we continue to do that same thing? And I also love Zaretta Hammond talks about being a warm demander. James Moffitt talks about firm compassion. This is not about not setting boundaries, not having expectations. We find great comfort in predictability. So it's not about a lack of any of those things. But I think, again, we misunderstand, or we look at, again, if we don't do something that makes us feel like we as adults are more in control and are compliance driven, then we aren't holding students accountable. And I don't think that is the case. So here's the part where I just wanted to offer some different tools and things that, are kind of like where I'm at. And as I said, I'm a fellow traveler and I'm having to kind of go through this process myself. So these are the questions that I made this visual for myself. So I'm just sharing it with you. You can, again, it might not work for you, but before I move forward and consider whether a student, what consequence I'm going to give them, I move through this process myself. And it kind of just becomes now, like, I don't have to like look at the visual and be like, step 1. I really just have it embedded in, again, my philosophy of trying to think, have I considered what the student is trying to communicate with their behavior, and what their brain state is at the time that they were behaving that way? And this is where Amy Fast is out in Oregon. And she said, and I love this, and I screenshotted this so long ago and kept it. She says, I took Brene Brown's advice and asked a student, the story I'm telling myself about why you're behaving this way, not doing the work, is, where am I getting it wrong? And her response changed the trajectory of our whole interaction and plan moving forward. Take time to ask. And so that's where I don't have to guess sometimes, actually all the time. I always want to have the student have an opportunity to give voice to what they're experiencing and them tell me from their perspective. And because again, it's about them, it's not about me. So you'll see, will the planned consequence elicit learning and connection, or control and resentment? And again, that's going back, what brain state is it going to put them in? What can I see, like, from what is happening? Am I considering my own brain and body state, my own implicit bias, and my own triggers? Because there are certain behaviors, there might be certain times of days, there might be certain students that you have very little tolerance for. And so are you reactionary to those behaviors, more so than any others? I have, sometimes it's like, I have teachers, like, if you say, call them bruh, we have students who will be like, call an adult bruh. And I have some that is absolutely like the greatest disrespect. And it's definitely a trigger. I can see that that's a trigger. Whereas others, they're like, hey, bruh, back, like they don't see that. That's not as big of an issue for them. Well, have I considered whether consequence will elicit the outcomes I want based on data and trends? And again, that's where that is that's a process that sometimes you yourself have to look at your own data. I can look at the students that I serve across a grade level, but you can also look across a school, across a division. Is the planned consequence proportional to the behavior? I mean, sometimes like the behavior is, again, we'll just use the hoodie as an example. So that's like way down here. It's really not impacting anyone else in a classroom. It's not stopping the teacher from teaching. It's not stopping anybody else from learning. But a student has done it 3 times. So all of a sudden, it's not about hoodie. It's about defiant. So then we're like, okay, you've done it 3 times. So now you're chronically defiant. As a result of being chronically defiant, this is your really big consequence, which at the end of the day, the behavior was a hoodie, but yet the consequence is really about major defiance. And we're going to be like, okay, so you're in school suspension for a full day. You're going to miss all 7 of your classes. So that's that proportional behavior. And I can't answer these for you. I mean, obviously you can tell where I kind of lie on these, but you have to be able to come to your own place of comfort for these. Have I considered whether consequence serves the system or serves the student? That's one of my favorite ones. Does it serve I told you I'm right here. My phone's ringing. And am I choosing this consequence because I lack access to or understanding of alternatives? So again, I don't have restorative practice. I don't know what restorative practices look like. I don't feel comfortable using restorative practices. I don't have access to what I need to make restorative practices happen, for instance. So, and that's an adult issue. That's a system issue. That's not where a student should be punished because of that. That's our problem to solve, not for kids to deal with that. Again, just wanted to give you some resources, some additional things. I loved this tiered support because a lot of us are in MTSS school divisions or schools. And so I love this visual about putting in supports by tiers, some different things that you can use. It also references Bruce Perry's Regulate, Relate, and Reason. In the disciplinary process, sometimes we often go right over regulate and relate to reason, and we start asking a student why they did what they did. Do they understand, that, the harm that they've done when they're in a dysregulated state, and it only serves to dysregulate them more. And then we see that as them, again, willfully choosing even more challenging behavior, when we have fostered that because we've skipped right over them regulating and relating, because learning comes in that reason part. We have to have them in a brain state that they can hear us, they can engage with us, just like with any other learning. Instead of in-school prevention, I just said suspension in general. If we looked at it as intervention and prevention, it might change, because the word suspend in of itself is to me means exclusion. So if we looked at it, what can we do to intervene and what can we do to prevent? And that's where I see things like SEL, the power in SEL, the powerful in incorporating mindfulness and other strategies that help students when they are struggling, opportunities to build community in small groups instead of out of school suspension. Again, being able to invest in how we bring restorative practice learning and knowledge into our schools. When a student engages in something, giving them opportunities to reflect with targeted learning, having them and doing that beside and with them, just like we would as a teacher, in a guided learning way, and moving them into an independent learning way. So these are just some, again, I just don't want you to, I wanted to offer some suggestions that I'm considering, that I've tried, that I have found success with. One of the things that I've had staff do when they're in a regulated state, this is not something you do when a student is, or a staff member is in a dysregulated state, because they have to come to this when they can really be reflective, is having an emotional regulation plan, because it can really help. So when we see a student moving into a dysregulated state where they might make behavioral choices that could lead them into the discipline process, it gives us some strategies so that we can co-regulate, we can come up beside, we can offer them supports, and things that ultimately, again, will prevent, because that's where we want to be, right? We want to actually get to we're preventing it from even going into the discipline cycle if we can. But this is, again, something that not just for students, but for adults too, because again, we're starting with ourselves. And right now we have a lot of dysregulated adults for lots of reasons. Our profession has got a lot of pressure, and it's being really taxed right now in a lot of different areas. So, and that is it. That's my little placeholder slide. So that's what I have to say about all that.
Hey, Jodi, thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Oh gosh, I know. I'm over here on a soapbox. I know.
Well, no, it's okay, and you're passionate about it, and I think for good reason. I have a couple of thoughts, and we have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
And I do want to pause and just let people know, if you're watching, now is a great time to put a question in if you haven't already. We have, and even if you have, you can put in another question if you want to. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat now, and we'll try to get those in a moment. There were a couple of things that struck me, and well, the first thing I had to say is the pocket portel. Okay. So, I think we need to take this a step further. I think we need like a deck of cards, and we have a pocket portel. Then we have a pocket Lori. We have a pocket Jodi. We have a pocket Dustin. With a picture of everybody and something they can help us out with throughout the day. We can, we can market that to all of our colleagues here. But I love the pocket portel. It just sounded like a lot of fun. Yeah. It reminds me of like the flat Stanley, right? There was that thing. So question-wise, aside from my just love of that idea of the pocket portel, this journey that you've been on, and I love kind of the fellow traveler, and I think that's a great description, because I think there's so many people that I meet and talk to that are on this journey, and maybe at various places, and I think the first really important thing to realize is it is a journey, right? You've not arrived at your destination and just kind of like, here it all is. Even when we think about the people that, you've talked about, even in fact, I was looking here and I think Lori's behind me somewhere. But you talked quite a bit about Lori, and
I know.
kept mentioning the
I
book.
got Pino back here too.
There you go. There you go. But one of the things that I hear from Lori a lot is kind of that thought that, like when she's writing these books, she's going in the classroom, she's working with educators, she's working with
Right.
students,
Yeah, she's a
and
practitioner.
always learning. So this journey is one of always learning. I think if we lose the curiosity, we maybe this isn't the journey for us anymore. But I think that's really important. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about kind of the spark. Okay. So, you've been doing, you've been in education for a long time. The system, you mentioned kind of the system being broken. So coming into a system that was, broken, learning a lot of the things that were being done that aren't helping. I think about zero tolerance. I think about a lot of the approaches. Can you look back at a moment in time where you kind of felt like, oh, this isn't working? This isn't doing what we want to do. Was there a spark that you can really remember that kind of ignited you on this, the journey, and what was it from there that really kind of kept things going?
Well, I think that when I became an administrator and just the same students kept coming back and coming back and coming back. And, I just stopped and I thought, and then, there was also this, especially my first year when I had to just like deep dive, like, do I even want to do this? Because I felt like I was more about the guidelines and like, okay, like you did it again. So now we're going to ratchet it up again. And, oh, you're back. We're doing this, and I just thought, it felt so, I felt so unsettled. And again, it just was not working, because if I maintain myself as an educator, so regardless of what role or capacity, we're all educators, right? Like that's what we are. And I was like, I'm not teaching, they're not learning. This is not working. And then I just would see, again, the same students being suspended. And then I would look at their grades. And I'm like, well, of course their grades are in the gutter because they're not here.
Right.
And then I think it goes back to, I think there's this great quote about, if kids who can't read, we don't send them home and say, figure it out and come back, and I'm like, but a student who is engaging in behavior, we're like, I'm going to suspend you. I want you to go home and think about that.
Right.
Work it out and you come back.
Yeah.
Right. And so it just, none of it made any like logical sense. But I think I just remember in those first years, I said, I might not be in a classroom, but I have my own class of kids. It's the same kids coming back over and over. So I just, in that way, and even just with my own children's experience, I kind of mentioned that, and just seeing, I think somebody mentioned like the putting their name on the board, or putting checks beside your name. And I just know, I look back at my oldest daughter, and that's when the behavior charts, and every day she would come home and I didn't know better then. Like when you know better, you do better.
Yep.
Maya says it. The stress and anxiety every day, because I thought I was doing a good thing by checking her agenda to see what color.
Right.
And she can tell me now, because she's in this world with me in terms of conversation. And she's like, it was so anxiety inducing. It was so anxiety inducing. And goodness, if she got a yellow at 8:30, she sat in that anxiety all day, because I was going to see a yellow, and I was going to be like, you got a yellow? So,
Yep.
Yeah,
I remember getting the crumbled up behavior sheets, or the behavior sheets that, my son had changed because he wasn't happy about, but who wouldn't, right? I mean, fortunately things are changing. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like even though these are really tough times, there's some positive things out there happening. We're seeing people, ditch the clip charts and some of these things that, Portel always talks about it, kind of the public shaming of a clip chart. Okay, well, which of my staff people want to have a clip chart about, how they're doing today?
Right.
So we're making some progress for sure. But these are tough times, and you pointed out, I think, well, with the pandemic, with everything that's going on, these have been really tough times for educators. And during tough times, our brain pathways sometimes go to familiar approaches, even though they're not working. And you had that kind of Einstein, we keep doing the same thing, even though it's not working. But that happens when things are tough. So, we're hearing around the country where people are having a difficult time in classrooms and where they're seeing an increase in behaviors. Well, what's the reaction? The reaction is, oh, well, we need more of this punitive discipline. We need more suspension, expulsion. We need, old-fashioned discipline, whatever you call it. We had a school district earlier this year that brought back corporal punishment after 20 years of having it gone. So you sometimes hear, from those that might not be in the same place in their journey, but they want, and you probably heard this as an administrator, they want to send somebody to the office for a consequence. They want something to happen to them because they did whatever they did in the classroom. So they want to send to an administrator and have the administrator suspend or expel or somehow do something to the individual for what happened. And I'm really concerned during these times that there are going to be places that move in the totally wrong direction. So what do you say to a young educator, a young educator getting started in their career who, maybe hasn't been introduced to some of these ideas? How do you begin to make the shift?
So I think it's a great question. And I think that that's where making sure as a school leader and, me wanting to, again, talk to school leaders as much as I can. I know a lot of us are, because in order to support our, and can I just say, we are desperate for people to come into our profession, right? We are desperate right now. Our profession, the need is so far greater than who is coming in to fill that need. And we have so many who are choosing retirement because it is so, so tough. But I think that's where we have to start with teaching them about their own brain and body state. I mean, I can't emphasize enough that when I learned about and started being able to consider my own self so deeply, when I think about those first years of teaching and how every behavior felt like a personal attack on me and the stress that caused. And so, like, how do you shift from it feeling personal to our business is personal? We are in a deeply personal business of, humanity, but behaviors are not, don't take those personally.
Right.
And I think that's where if we can, for me, like, because I think somebody said, do I get a lot of pushback? Yes. I'm going to be real straight up with you. Like, it's yes. And like I said, the question is, you're not holding kids accountable. You're being really soft on them, all of those things.
Right.
And first off, that presumes that I don't want to see kids thrive. I don't want to see kids grow. I don't want to set them up for success in the future. And those, I don't believe that's what we come to the table for.
Right.
All of us are striving for that with our children. And so, but I do get pushback because it's kind of scary, right? Because it's like losing a little bit of control. But once you realize the science of it, I think that takes the fear out, actually.
Right.
So that's where that investment, if you look at it as a content area, and I guess that's where, doing that work of how can we look at this as a content area, then you'll invest in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been thinking and kind of sharing a lot this idea that just keeps coming back to me, which is this idea that a little bit of brain science and the right perspective or outlook can make such a huge difference. And I mean, you when you talked about like people looking at all behavior being intentional, the truth is we have science now that tells us that, that's not the case. Not all behaviors are intentional. The polyvagal theory, knowing that things might be kind of bottom up or being, really kind of brought by our nervous systems. So there's so much information out there that I think can really help.
Yeah.
But it's hard. Shifts are hard.
It is hard. It's hard. I don't want to be one to sit here and say like, because it is hard, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it. And it helps you like for my own health and wellness. So again, it's like that whole like self-care. It's about collective care. Again, that's a Pocket Portel moment too. He talks about
Put my card out here.
Right. Not self-care, but like collective care, us being
Right.
able to lean in
Yeah.
on each other. I think, having community, humans are not wanting to be isolated. That's not
Right.
how we're biologically designed. And so again, I know I'm not trying to simplify it, but there's so many resources. I am not a neuroscientist, nor do I play one on TV. But this is all so accessible,
Right.
and there are ways to make it. It's once you start even hearing little pieces, the shift starts happening. And I go, I'm one. There's a lot of others that are. I will be happy to talk to anybody about this, share resources. People have asked a lot. I will share anything I have. Absolutely. If I can help. I didn't get here alone, and I want to hopefully
Right.
let people
Right.
know, like,
Yeah, yeah, well, and that's the amazing thing about, I feel like I've had the privilege to, kind of find a community out there of like-minded people that are doing this work. People like you and Matthew and so many others out there that are doing this work and really are wanting to share and wanting to help. And speaking of which, you talked about Lori a lot, and of course, Lori was here on the call with us. Yeah, yep, and had several comments. She was driving, but was listening. Occasionally, would
okay.
comment, hopefully in a safe way. But people in this community, kind of showing up and being part of these things, I think is really important. I know we're almost at time here, but let me see if I can get to a couple of comments or
Okay.
questions,
Okay.
if you're okay with that.
Yeah,
And
of
they're not going to
course.
come
Of
in and
course.
turn off the lights on you. I know that, in fact, here was another thing from Lori. This is about the adults. Are discipline referrals more about student behaviors or staff behaviors?
Well,
And
and that's a great comment, because what am I saying? Behavior is communication, not just
yeah,
behavior of children. So sometimes I can look at a referral and be like, that teacher, or I can look at 8 referrals from the same teacher and say, they are communicating too.
hmm
They need support. They need something also.
hmm hmm
And so again, this is not when I say, about adults. So we can, but yeah, sometimes referrals tell me a really powerful story about where a staff member
absolutely,
is,
yeah.
what they might need.
And I'm a proponent of Ross Greene's work and the idea that kids do well if they can, and the same holds true of our teachers and our staff, right? Teachers do well if they can, and I think that the primary difference between an educator and a student is really about brain development. That a child, a very young child, especially, our brains don't fully develop till we're 25 or 30 years old. There's a predictable pattern of brain development, which leaves our prefrontal cortex being kind of last to get fully baked, and kind of taking that into account. Kids aren't miniature adults. They don't have the same they don't have the same experiences and whatnot. But at the same time, when you look at our needs, when you look at how we should be supported, it's the same, whether you're talking about a child or an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, so important. So let me get to a couple of others here. Trisha, a parent in Idaho, or parents in Idaho, have been promoting their tier 2 and tier 3 approaches must include restraints and seclusion, falsely believing that kids behave badly with no warning. How do I respond to this? Do you have any thoughts? I've got a couple of thoughts that pop out, but I'll.
Yeah, I mean, I think your thoughts. I mean, again, I'm going to say what the most powerful part of this has been for all of the pushback, is I can rely on science and data, and sometimes those that are the most resistant or the least receptive, the science and the data of it has challenged their thinking and has
Mhm.
allowed them to take pause. So I think with this one, I would say and you can probably start giving lots of information about what research and data that we have, um, that tells us the impact of restraint and
Right,
seclusion.
right. Well, yeah, and my first response, and I won't go long here, but is that restraint seclusion should not be part of tiered interventions. I mean, restraint seclusion are designed to be crisis management interventions and should not be part of a behavioral intervention plan or any of that. It's crisis management. I don't think seclusion is ever a reasonable approach, period. And restraint should be rare. It should only happen if a child is really posing a life-threatening situation. So when you begin to plan these things, unfortunately, you will use them more. And when you use them more, of course, that's going to lead to trauma. That trauma is going to lead to changes in the brain. That change in the brain is going to lead to an increase probably in stress related behaviors. So, when you're planning to do these things, you will do them. When you do them, you will probably lead to a child that is more stressed, doesn't feel safe, and is likely to have behavior. So, I think there's a lot, and Tricia certainly can talk more about this with you if you're interested, but there's a lot wrong with the idea of putting them as tier 2 and 3 interventions. These should not be planned, responses.
I think we can look at the word intervention. What is an intervention?
Right.
Does it match that also in terms of back to those reflective questions for those parents? Like where are they making a connection that this is going to get the outcome they're after? Like you've got to kind of like have them build that story, or the story they're telling themselves, that this is going to lead to this and this. Because I think if you have them voice that, you'll find where you can disrupt and interrupt that and say, actually here, let me, quite honestly. And again, with semantic wise, I just think also just one more, because it just made me think of like the wording, inclusion and seclusion. And semantically, again, we sometimes have things that we give great names to, like that's a cool down room, when really it's just about putting a kid in a room behind a door by themselves to like, again, be isolated and to bring about a sense of intrusive control in them. But we call it a calm down room. But again, do they calm down in there? So don't we can't semantically fool ourselves.
Well, and we see that a lot. We see that a lot with restraint seclusion, and it kind of confuses. It confuses parents. We hear things like, "Oh, well, restraint is therapeutic." It's not. A physical restraint is an intervention intended to save a life in a crisis situation. We're not talking about a hug. That's an entirely different thing. But when people begin to kind of obfuscate things with the wording they use, it really does a disservice to everybody. And I can't tell you how many, blue room, cool room. Somebody sent me a picture today. Not today, yesterday, of a seclusion room. They called it Alaska. Here are kids that will probably forever have some trauma related to Alaska and not know why, if they're being put in the seclusion room against their will. All sorts of interesting things that people do. What matters is the function,
Oh, sorry. One more thing, because it reminded me, Jessica Harris, and Jessica too, and she's a teacher in Indiana. And we're talking about those new teachers. You were asking that question. And I just have to tell you this. This is a new strategy that she uses. Again, I think if you ever have heard Matthew Portell will talk about it sometimes, because he has kind of seen it in action. But they have a system in her school for the adults that if the adult is in a state, they've given enough understanding to the adults that if the adult is in a state where they need a break, they have like a call out system.
Yep.
So they have a whole system built to say, if you as an adult need a minute because you're becoming dysregulated, like this is it. And I am obsessed with like that. I'm thinking, yes. So when I think about that for those new teachers you were talking about, or any teacher, a system like that puts in place that again says, we value you as a human. We know that all of us have this happen within ourselves. And here's how we can approach it really in a positive, preventative way. So I just want to give a shout out because that's something that I am wanting to explore more for implementation, because I think it sounds amazing.
I actually talked to a administrator in Montana today who was using a very similar strategy, and they actually had something on their phone, like a button on their phone that they were able to push, like some kind of app. So they didn't have to go to the walkies. They didn't have to say anything. They could just push it. It would notify other people, and without being, calling attention to the child or others that they needed help. And what a great thing to do. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Jania asked if the slides can be sent to our email, or
of course.
Okay, can people reach out to you? Is there an email or an address that people can reach out to?
Sure. My email is as I'm like sitting here saying, I have so many, right? I have my work email, I have my personal email. I'm like, what is
Sure.
Jodi J Place at Gmail would be the best one. You can also reach out to me on Twitter if you want to send me your contact information on Twitter. I'm on Twitter.
And I also have I'm going to paste your address.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, great.
However, it's best for you to interact with me. But yeah, I absolutely, of course. I will, if you find it will be helpful, I would love to share it with you.
Great. And a couple more here. I don't know if you noticed, but our friend Dustin is here. And Dustin talked about, my own personal practices changed when I became more reflective and included my students in this conversation. So important. I think collaboration is so important. Instead of making an assumption that I know what's going on, inviting into the process is so very important. Dustin also mentioned the need for breaks throughout the day. And of course, Dustin had presented here recently. And because I know that you guys present together sometimes, I told Dustin, we've already booked it. We've already booked you to come back and present with Dustin, which will be a lot of fun.
It will be a lot of fun because we loved getting a chance to work together, even though he's in Kansas, I'm in Virginia. And let me just tell anybody who's watching this, there is a network out there, and there's a network that wants to bring you in, and we want to support you, support each other. Again, I'm still learning and growing, and we all can bring something in. So just know, as in terms of hope, if you feel very alone, because I've been there where I feel very, very alone in this work, and there is a whole network of people that just want to be there for each other. So
absolutely, and which is fantastic. And of course, I think there's a couple places where people can connect to that. Of course, Matthew Pertel has the Trauma Informed Educators Network, and if you look up Trauma Informed Educators Network on Facebook, it's a good place. There's a good group there. You can connect with them on their website as well. The Attachment and Trauma Network's another really great network of people to connect with. And it really is. I mean, I would even say more than that, where it's like a community of people that are connecting together and, amplifying and working together, and really great stuff. I have two last things, and then we'll let you wrap up here. Jamie Emberson, actually from the UK, said, sorry about joining late, but thank you. I love my emotional regulation plan, and I use that at a systemic level across all of the organizations and school. Are the handouts that are used, let's see, are the handouts that can be used, of course, credit to yourself. Great work. Thanks. So again, that's an email request. So
I'm happy if it's a resource. And again, make it true for your community. I think, again, so I think educators are great pirates. We're always out there being inspired by each other and making things based, we have to do that. So
and always good. I mean, I appreciate, you were sharing things from a bunch of kind of our fellow travelers, and it's always great to be able to, credit people for their work. But I think that, again, we're here, I think, trying to do this work for a mission, for a reason. And everybody that I've connected with, at least, they're always happy to share things. And again, credit's always recommended, but and Nicole said, my question is, as a principal, do you get a lot of pushback? And you had kind of addressed that earlier. I would imagine you do. And I know Nicole has some experience inside of a school as well. One word of advice to another administrator that is making this travel, what would you say to them about pushback?
I would say push through.
Push through?
Okay. Push through, because I expect it, because again, you're seeing a fear response, because when we say this, we're asking for a shift, a change. We're asking for what feels like a loss of control. And so that sometimes the pushback is coming again from where they are, right, in terms of that fight or flight or freeze. So don't take it personally, but just provide the information, provide the support. I get that every time. Again, I've done this at a traditional school, and I really started honestly with at first, it was like, everybody has to do this, let's tell everybody. And I said, how about we start with a group that wants to come they're interested, they're curious, then it can build out, So I think, again, of course, I want everybody to have it, but I started off with a group of sort of willing, curious, totally volunteer people. And then other people heard about it, saw what they were doing. They would talk about their successes. And so then it started building without, again, that pushback got less and less and less.
I think
the culture became one. If people didn't want to do it at that point, the culture became uncomfortable for them, and that just wasn't the right fit for them.
Right.
but by and large, so I'm back in a new community right now, right? So I'm going through that process again. I did that in alt ed. I was like, we're
Okay.
not going to be traditional alt ed. This is not going to be like some like make it so bad they hate it, they want to go back. No, no educational site should be so horrible and awful that kids want to like flee from it. I was like, not happening here. But here I am again, and I'm going to have to go through that process again. But I'm telling you, if you just can stick with it, and
Yep.
the rewards will be, I promise.
You know James Moffat? Yeah, okay, I thought so. And James presented with us a few months ago, and the reason he came into my head here is that response that you had reminded me of something he said, and he talked about his experience, and he talked about his experience and kind of what he learned throughout the way of trying to bring people along, and really what it comes down to is that he talked about how I mean, the same thing that holds true with the kids. We should be doing things with people, not to people. But very often the temptation is, hey, I learned this great stuff. We're going to do it. And you're not doing it with them. You're doing it kind of to them. You're telling them what they're going to do. And of course, if that doesn't work, then James said, well, then you end up doing it for them. So they're not really doing it. So you do it for them. And he said, really what you want to get to is doing it with them. And kind of from the start is like, how do we bring people in? How do we get them on board? And it's about collaborating. We want to collaborate not only with our kids, but our teachers and staff, and nobody likes having things done to them. Right. But it's hard. It's hard. And I'm sure a lot of growth. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you all day, and it would be easy for me to do. But I want to thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you for sharing.
It has been my honor. It has truly been my honor.
I so appreciate it. And, our hope with these events that we do is that, they will inspire others, that, others that are somewhere in the journey might, watch these presentations and say, hey, here was somebody and here was their journey and here's where they came. And that's the hope, I mean, regardless of how many people watch an individual presentation, the idea is like, if somebody's sparked out there, it's well worthwhile. And, I think, really, really beneficial. So thank you so much. Nicole mentioned here that this can be a lonely road, but know
I hope
that
you will reach out to me. I hope you will, because I will make it less lonely. And I know Ginger did say next month, a lot of us in this network are going to the Attachment Trauma Network Conference. And I went to last year. That's where Guy and I got to interact. I had followed him, knew him from afar, but we got to like come together, and Lori Desautel will be at that conference.
Yes.
And just let me just say, like, you will find your people. It will fill your cup. It is like the most amazing experience. You will go back out just feeling like just empowered to do the work. And I know that's not possible for everybody. They have a virtual option too if you can't travel. I did both of them last year, and it was like amazing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just shared a Ginger's link. And of course, it is not too late to sign up to come to Houston, which is where the in-person event is happening, or to sign up for the virtual event. And if you do the in-person event, you get the virtual event, I think, free as well. So you get to do both. Lots of great things. And again, it's the community. I mean, last year leaving that, I mean, it was just so fantastic to meet all the people that are doing this work, and people that I knew from afar, and then the opportunity to meet in person.
Yeah.
So great opportunity. I'm going to mention here real quickly, and then we'll sign off here. I just want to mention that we do have, of course, another event coming up in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks we have, and I'm trying to share my screen here as I do like a few different things, and let's hope that this goes where I want it to go. Oops, there we go. Oops, and I went to the wrong screen, but that's okay because we will roll with it, and I'll get it here anyway. So in 2 weeks, we have another presentation coming, or I guess discussion coming up. And I don't know if you've ever followed the neurodivergent teacher.
Yes.
Okay, really fantastic. Really excited to have McAllister joining us. Should be a fun conversation. She does a lot of amazing things on social media, takes a really different lens on supporting people. So we're really excited to have that coming up. So, as always, we have a lot of great things coming, and look forward to seeing people again in about 2 weeks. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you so much again, Jodi. And you can hang on for 1 second. We'll let everybody go, and we'll be out of here.
Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you connect.